The crisp, white piece of legal paper taped to the solid oak of my brand-new front door was flapping gently in the cold autumn breeze. I stared at the bold, threatening letters of the fraudulent lawsuit my mother had taped there, demanding grandparental visitation rights and a massive share of my hard-earned baking company under the guise of elder support liabilities. Just 12 years prior, this same woman had disowned me in a sterile hospital parking lot, leaving me on the freezing pavement with nothing but my 2-week-old baby girl, Isabel, while she handed the entirety of my late father's multi-million-dollar estate to my golden child sister, Alana. My mother had expected me to crawl back, broken and begging for her mercy, but instead, I had rented a damp, drafty room above a noisy laundromat, bought a failing, grease-stained bakery, and quietly built an empire from the flour dust up. Now, standing on the porch of the beautiful, historic stone estate I had finally purchased entirely with my own money, I felt no anger, only a cold, absolute resolve to ensure my mother and sister paid for their toxic entitlement in a currency they understood best: complete financial and social ruin. My name is Niamh Barrett. To understand the sheer depth of the betrayal that fractured my family, you must understand the toxic dynamics of the household I grew up in. We lived in Elderglen, an exclusive, old-money suburb where reputation was fiercely guarded and appearance was valued far above actual human character. My mother, Fiona Barrett, was a deeply superficial, status-obsessed woman who ran our home like a corporate public relations firm. To Fiona, children were not independent human beings to be nurtured. They were accessories designed to reflect her own social success. My younger sister, Alana, was born with the exact traits my mother worshipped: highly dramatic, deeply manipulative, and completely obsessed with luxury brands and social media validation. From early childhood, Alana was designated as the golden child, showered with horses, private tutors, and luxury trips, while I was treated as a convenient scapegoat whose only purpose was to work behind the scenes to keep the family functioning. When our father, Kenneth Barrett, passed away unexpectedly from a sudden heart attack during my sophomore year in college, our family dynamic shifted from quietly toxic to overtly hostile. My father had been a quiet, hard-working real estate developer who had always tried to shield me from my mother's emotional abuse. He had privately promised me that my education and future would be fully secured by his estate. However, in his grief-stricken state before his passing, he had left the entirety of his assets in a discretionary family trust, naming my mother, Fiona, as the sole trustee. The moment the funeral services concluded, Fiona wasted no time in seizing absolute control of the wealth. She immediately cut off my college tuition payments, forcing me to take on 3 separate jobs and massive student loans to finish my degree in food science and business administration, while she purchased a brand new European sports car for Alana's 20th birthday. The ultimate breaking point in our relationship arrived when I made the deeply personal, brave decision to become a mother. I had been in a relationship with a man who promised me a shared future, but the moment he discovered I was pregnant, he showed his true colors and vanished, leaving me to face the journey alone. Rather than allowing his cowardice to break me, I embraced the path of single motherhood, determined to give my unborn daughter the unconditional love and safety I had never received from my own mother. When I shared the news of my pregnancy with Fiona, her reaction was filled with pure, unadulterated disgust. She declared that an unmarried, pregnant daughter working as a simple kitchen manager was a permanent stain on the prestigious Barrett family name. She demanded that I give the baby up for adoption to preserve Alana's social prospects with the wealthy local developers. When I refused her monstrous demands, Fiona's passive-aggressive hostility turned into a cold, calculated plan of complete abandonment.
2 weeks after I gave birth to my beautiful daughter, Isabel, my mother called me to her sprawling suburban estate, claiming she wanted to discuss my father's trust distribution. When I arrived, exhausted and cradling my tiny newborn baby, I was met not with maternal warmth, but with Fiona's high-priced estate attorney. Fiona sat coldly on the designer leather sofa, holding a glass of white wine, and informed me that she had officially restructured the family trust. She had legally disowned me, allocating every single dollar of my father's multi-million-dollar estate, the family home, and the commercial real estate holdings to my sister, Alana. Fiona looked at my tiny sleeping daughter with utter contempt and told me that since I had chosen to live a cheap, embarrassing life, I could fund it myself. She ordered me to leave her property immediately, stating that she would not allow a penniless single mother to drag down the family's social standing. I stood in that driveway, under the freezing November rain, holding my 2-week-old baby tightly against my chest, feeling a profound, ice-cold clarity wash over my soul. I realized that begging these superficial, toxic people for decency was a waste of my life's energy. I packed our few belongings into my rusty 10-year-old compact car and drove away from Elderglen forever, leaving the warmth of my father's legacy behind to start entirely from zero. I relocated to Port Haven, a gritty, industrial coastal town located 3 hours away, where the cost of living was low and the people had no interest in the shallow country club optics of Elderglen. With the tiny remaining balance of my personal savings, I rented a cramped, drafty one-room studio apartment located directly above a noisy 24-hour commercial laundromat. The walls shook from the spin cycles and the air constantly smelled of cheap industrial detergent and damp steam, but it was a safe haven for my daughter. Desperate to secure a stable income, I walked the industrial streets of Port Haven every morning with Isabel strapped to my chest in a fabric wrap, looking for any opportunity to build a business. That was when I discovered the Hearthstone, a historic, run-down bakery on the corner of the working-class Harbor District. The windows were boarded up, the industrial ovens were caked in decades of grease, and the elderly owner, Mr. Abernathy, was struggling with failing health and mounting tax debts.
Recognizing the raw potential of the historic location and utilizing my degree in food science, I approached Mr. Abernathy with a bold, legal proposal. I offered to take over the bakery's outstanding tax liabilities and pay him a percentage of all future monthly revenues in exchange for a strict, legally binding lease-to-own agreement for the property and equipment. Seeing my raw determination and the sleeping baby on my chest, the kind old man agreed, signing the paperwork with a warm smile. The first 2 years of operating the bakery were a grueling, exhausting blur of physical labor and sleep deprivation. I woke up at 2 a.m. every single morning, carrying Isabel down the creaky wooden stairs to the bakery kitchen. I set up a safe, clean wooden crate filled with soft blankets behind the warm pastry ovens, where my baby girl would sleep peacefully while I hand-kneaded hundreds of pounds of sourdough and baked fresh artisanal bread for the local harbor workers. My hands were constantly blistered, my back ached from lifting heavy sacks of flour, and there were nights when I survived on nothing but leftover day-old rolls so that I could afford to buy the high-quality organic formula and warm clothes my daughter needed. But slowly, the grueling labor began to bear magnificent, undeniable fruit. Using my scientific background, I developed a unique, slow fermentation sourdough recipe and a proprietary line of high-end, gluten-free pastries that caught the attention of local gourmet restaurants and high-end cafes in the neighboring cities. The harbor workers loved the hearty, affordable breakfasts, and the city commuters began lining up around the block before sunrise just to buy our signature goods. Within 4 years, I had completely paid off Mr. Abernathy's outstanding liabilities, securing full legal ownership of the property and equipment.
As the years rolled on, I quietly transformed the humble harbor bakery into a highly lucrative culinary empire. I established Barrett and Company Artisanal Goods, expanding our operations into a state-of-the-art commercial production facility and securing lucrative wholesale supply contracts with major high-end organic supermarket chains across 3 states. I hired a brilliant, dedicated team of local bakers and delivery drivers, paying them the respectful, living wages I had been denied in my youth. Throughout this meteoric rise, I maintained an incredibly quiet, low-profile lifestyle. I continued to live in modest apartments, drove a reliable but simple vehicle, and poured 90% of my business profits back into high-yielding private index funds and commercial real estate acquisitions, keeping my growing multi-million-dollar net worth completely hidden behind a secure private holding company managed by my corporate attorneys. 12 years after the night I was thrown out into the freezing rain, I finally decided it was time to buy our forever home. I purchased a breathtaking, historic stone cottage nestled on the high cliffs overlooking the bay of Port Haven. The estate was surrounded by mature wild rose gardens, possessed a massive, sunlit kitchen where I could bake with my daughter, and featured a beautiful, custom-designed bedroom for Isabel, who had grown into a brilliant, happy, and deeply loved 12-year-old girl. It was our private sanctuary, a physical monument to 12 years of silent, honest, and unyielding labor.
We had only been living in our beautiful new home for 3 weeks when the ghosts of my toxic past unexpectedly materialized on our doorstep. I was in the front garden with Isabel, teaching her how to prune the autumn roses, when a rusted, heavily dented luxury sedan pulled into our gravel driveway. The car door opened, and my mother, Fiona, stepped out. She was followed by my sister, Alana. I froze, my hand tightening around the gardening shears as I took in their appearance. The 12 years had not been kind to them. Fiona's expensive designer clothes were faded and worn, her face lined with the deep, bitter wrinkles of constant stress, while Alana's arrogant posture was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, nervous twitch as she clutched a cheap, synthetic handbag. Fiona walked up the stone pathway, her eyes scanning our beautiful estate with a mixture of intense greed and immediate, sickening entitlement. She looked at me, forcing a theatrical, tearful smile onto her face as she reached out her arms. "Neve, my beautiful eldest daughter," she cried, her voice trembling with artificial emotion. "Oh, thank heaven we've finally found you. We have been searching for you for years. Look at how wonderful you're doing. And this must be my darling granddaughter, Isabel. Oh, look at how much she looks like the Barrett family." I stepped directly in front of Isabel, shielding her completely from my mother's reaching hands. "Do not take another step, Fiona," I said, my voice incredibly cold, smooth, and completely devoid of any emotional warmth. "You have exactly 60 seconds to state your business on my private property before I have my security team physically remove you." Fiona's theatrical smile instantly faltered, replaced by a sharp flash of her old familiar anger, but she quickly forced her expression back into a pleading mask. "Neve, please, stop being so cold. We are your family. Your sister and I have fallen on incredibly hard times. Alana's boutique business went completely bankrupt, and the unscrupulous developers she partnered with took everything we had. We had to sell the family estate in Elderglen to pay off her mounting debts. We have nothing left, Neve. We are being evicted from our rental apartment next week. Since you have this massive, beautiful home with so many empty rooms, and since you owe your success to the Barrett family work ethic, we decided to forgive the past. We are moving in with you. I can help you manage this estate, and Alana can finally live the comfortable life she deserves." I looked at my mother,
then at my sister, who was nodding eagerly, fully expecting me to bow to their demands out of some misplaced biological obligation. The sheer, unhinged audacity of their request was so breathtakingly absurd that I couldn't contain myself. I threw my head back and let out a loud, genuine laugh that echoed off the stone walls of my cottage. "You want to move into my home?" I asked, wiping a tear of laughter from my eye. "This same daughter you left in a freezing parking lot with a newborn baby because she was a stain on your precious reputation? You want to live in the luxury paid for by the hands you blistered with your cruelty? No. You will not cross this threshold. You will not speak to my daughter. You will leave my property right now, and if you ever set foot in Port Haven again, I will ensure my legal team ties you up in harassment lawsuits for the rest of your miserable lives." Alana's face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly jealousy. "You selfish, ungrateful witch!" she shrieked, stepping forward. "Everything you have belongs to us. You stole Dad's success. You're nothing but a cheap baker. You owe us."
Before she could step any closer, my automated estate gates began to close, and our large, protective family rescue dog let out a low, warning growl from the porch. Realizing they were completely powerless, Fiona dragged a screaming Alana back to their rusted sedan, spinning their tires on the gravel as they sped away in humiliating defeat. But the next morning, as I walked down the stone steps to collect the morning mail, I found a crisp, white envelope taped securely to my front door. I opened it, and my eyes narrowed as I read the legal documents inside. It was a formal court summons and preliminary injunction notice for grandparental custody visitation and filial support liabilities. Drafted by a cheap, corrupt local attorney in Elder Glen, Fiona was suing me in civil court, claiming that as my biological mother, she was entitled to a mandatory monthly filial support stipend of $8,000 from my business revenues to prevent her destitution, and demanding court-ordered bi-weekly unsupervised visitation with my daughter, Isabel. The notice claimed that I was an unfit, unstable mother who was alienating a loving grandmother from her only grandchild. I stared at the paper, and a cold, dangerous smile spread across my face. Fiona had made the ultimate, fatal mistake of bringing a legal knife to a corporate gunfight. I immediately called my lead corporate attorney, Marcus Vance, a brilliant, high-priced legal strategist who had managed my commercial acquisitions for years. Within 2 hours, Marcus was sitting in my home kitchen, reviewing the fraudulent lawsuit while his legal team ran a comprehensive, deep-dive financial audit on Fiona and Alana Barrett. What Marcus uncovered was the absolute perfect weapon for their total destruction. It turned out that in their desperate attempt to salvage Alana's bankrupt lifestyle brand, Fiona had taken out a series of high-interest commercial bridge loans, using their last remaining commercial property, the historic downtown plaza building in Elder Glen, where Alana's boutique had operated, as physical collateral. The high-interest loans had recently defaulted, and the commercial bank had quietly sold the distressed debt package to a private secondary acquisition trust. What my mother did not know was that the private trust that had purchased their defaulted debt package, NH Ventures LLC, was a wholly owned private shell corporation belonging entirely to me. I held the absolute ultimate legal ownership of the primary mortgage, the outstanding interest liabilities, and the commercial deed to their final financial lifeline. They owed my private holding company over $480,000 in immediate defaulted commercial debt. "Marcus," I said, leaning back in my chair and sipping my tea with absolute calmness, "I want you to execute an immediate, unconditional foreclosure and asset seizure on the Elder Glen commercial property. I also want you to file a massive countersuit against Fiona and Alana Barrett in the state Supreme Court for malicious prosecution, civil fraud, and harassment."
We will present the original trust dissolution documents from 12 years ago, proving they disowned me alongside the comprehensive financial records showing their fraudulent attempts to siphon my corporate assets. The legal retaliation was swift, brutal, and completely devastating. When the court date arrived 3 weeks later, Fiona and her cheap strip mall attorney walked into the courtroom with smug, arrogant expressions, fully expecting the judge to grant them a massive financial settlement out of parental pity. But their arrogance was instantly shattered the moment Marcus Vance stood up, presenting a mountain of certified corporate ledgers, the original signed disownment papers from 12 years ago, and the official foreclosure filings from NH Ventures LLC.
The judge's face grew increasingly dark as he reviewed the evidence of Fiona's systemic, decades-long financial abuse and her fraudulent claims of parental alienation. Within 45 minutes, the judge completely dismissed Fiona's lawsuit with prejudice, calling it one of the most egregious, malicious attempts at civil extortion he had ever witnessed in his entire career. He ordered Fiona and Alana to pay the entirety of my massive corporate legal fees and imposed a lifetime harassment restraining order, forbidding either of them from coming within 500 yards of me, my daughter, my home, or any of my business locations. But the final blow landed the very next morning. As the sole owner of NH Ventures LLC, I executed the final foreclosure decree on their commercial property. Since they had absolutely no liquid capital left to satisfy the outstanding $480,000 debt, the court seized their rusted luxury vehicle and their remaining personal bank accounts. Left completely bankrupt, publicly exposed as fraudulent extortionists in the regional newspapers, and stripped of every remaining penny of their false family pride, my mother and sister were forced to move into a tiny, state-funded public housing unit in the gritty industrial outskirts of Elder Glen, the very environment they had spent their entire lives looking down upon with disgust. Meanwhile, back in Port Haven, the sun shone brightly over our historic stone cottage. Isabel and I celebrated our victory by baking a massive, beautiful batch of fresh cinnamon rolls, filling our home with the sweet, comforting scent of sugar and yeast. I stood on my cliffside deck, watching my happy, brilliant daughter laugh as she played with our dog in the rose garden, completely insulated from the toxic malice of the past, focused entirely on the beautiful, abundant future we had built from the dust. Educational lesson. This story demonstrates a powerful sociological and psychological truth. The toxic dynamics of a highly narcissistic family system are inherently fragile and destined for ultimate collapse. When a parental figure prioritizes superficial social status, favoritism, and financial manipulation over genuine human character, they build their life on a foundation of sand. The golden child's unearned luxury creates an unsustainable lifestyle of entitlement and incompetence, while the scapegoat's forced self-reliance becomes the ultimate crucible for building real, unshakable strength, intellect, and financial independence. In the end, those who rely on exploiting others will always run out of resources, while those who quietly build their own capabilities from the ground up will possess the ultimate, unyielding leverage over their former oppressors. Personal advice. When a parent decides to disown you and leave you with nothing but a newborn baby in the cold just to protect a superficial family image, they have permanently forfeited the privilege of being called your family. Do not waste your precious years carrying the heavy burden of their guilt, begging for their affection, or trying to prove your worth to people who are completely blind to your value. True strength means having the absolute courage to walk away into the darkness, embrace the struggle of starting from zero, and trust the silent, brilliant power of your own unique labor. Guard your success and your children with an unyielding iron wall of legal and physical boundaries. When the people who threw you out like trash inevitably return to beg for a share of your abundance, do not hesitate to let the cold reality of their own choices be their final, bitter reward. Build your sanctuary, protect your peace,
and never look back at the bridges you had to burn to save your own life.